Today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
Whatever talent you have or whatever calling you have, odds are there's a peak. And then when you reach that peak, or maybe you don't ever roll the dice to begin with, one way or the other, you've got to face that my time regarding this particular thing is past and my life continues. So what do I do with that knowledge?
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Kevin Patrick Allen. Kevin has been a reporter from sea to shining sea, telling stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Now he's produced a documentary called What Comes Next that examines what happens when you lose a dream, lose a loved one, or even lose your freedom. The project was an opportunity to go beyond the skipping stone nature of today's journalism into a deeper exploration of the human condition. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you here today. So tell me, how did you get the inspiration to create What Comes Next?
I think by the nature of what I did for so many years as a reporter, you know, we've got to wrap everything up in 45 seconds or less. And that kind of lends itself to, whether intentionally or not, being a little inauthentic. I mean, life is rarely wrapped up in a bow in one day's events. And there were people that I met over the course of many years of reporting that I wanted to know what did come next in their life. And often we would intersect person or their family on the worst day of their life, or maybe it was a significant event in their life. And then you do the story and you're off down the road and you don't necessarily know how things played out. And I mean, I think we all know that from our own lives, that if you sum somebody up kind of who they are in a single day, you're missing a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've all had that experience where, you know, it could be a coworker or someone you see every day, you know, in the coffee shop every morning that you feel like you know and you've maybe even had conversations with, but then sometimes you find out that you really don't know what they're going through or what amazing things they've done in their past. There's just so much more. And it seems like this documentary is an opportunity to dig into a couple of people and really understand what they've gone through and what their stories are.
Yeah, it kind of started with one person. I was a radio reporter in San Francisco, and this was in the late 90s. And if you recall, around that time, extreme sports were relatively new. So I'm talking about X Games and things like that. And at that time, there was a 20-year-old in 1999 who was an up-and-comer in X Games, a cyclist, you know, the people that fly through the air and do the flips and all these kinds of things. And I was assigned to do a story on this young man. And he was so well-spoken, and he was just an interesting guy. And he listed off his injuries that he'd suffered to that point in his life. And at first, I kind of felt sorry for him. And then he just kept going to the point that it was almost comical, like Evel Knievel or something. Mm-hmm. And then as we talked, he said, you know, people tell me I'm going to regret this when I'm 40. And well, he was 20 years old at the time. So naturally, I couldn't finish that story then. And over the years, I wondered about him and if he did regret his life choices and how did that really work out for him? And lo and behold, you know how sometimes something that you say it's a coincidence, but it feels like it's more than that.
Right.
By 20 years later, I was in Kansas City and I looked him up, and he had suffered a terrible crash and had retired to Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And it's like, this is the time to do that story, to reach out to him and find out where he is, what's going on with him. Does he regret it? What comes next in his life? And I found it so fascinating that I decided I'm not going to stop with one person. I'm going to people who've they've lost their dreams, or maybe they've lost a loved one, or maybe they've even lost their freedom. And that was kind of the scope of what I was trying to discover, trying to explore through What Comes Next.
I see. And the young man that you were referring to is the first person that you profile in your new documentary, What Comes Next. What was his name again?
Chad Kagi.
Yes.
And for people that follow extreme sports, he became a legend. I mean, he had multiple gold medals in X Games, was on the podium, I think more than a dozen times, traveled the world, had lots of sponsors, and also accumulated a lot of hardware in his body. I mean, he broke his neck, he broke his back, he broke his heels, he broke his leg. I mean, really, I could list off 25, 30 injuries. And he kept getting better and kept accumulating injuries as well.
Wow. And you really go through that in the documentary, and you actually show examples of, x-rays and injuries, just sort of showing what he's gone through. And then you really feature what happened after that devastating injury that basically forced him into retirement, and sort of what comes next when you've been an extreme athlete all your life. And it's, probably not something you can do forever unless you are Evel Knievel, but I guess he even retired towards the end. But so it's interesting because sometimes, with people who are in the public eye and then, they retire or they're just not anymore, you kind of wonder, what do you do next? So it was really interesting to see the next chapter of his life. And I know you cover that in the documentary.
Yeah, and I feel like probably the reason this was so interesting to me was because while Chad is at an extreme level, I mean, don't we all relate to that? Mm-hmm. I mean, whatever talent you have or whatever calling you have, odds are there's a peak. And then when you reach that peak, or maybe you don't ever roll the dice to begin with, one way or the other, you've got to face that my time regarding this particular thing is past and my life continues. So what do I do with that knowledge?
Yeah. You don't have to be an extreme athlete to sometimes feel like you identify with your job or one particular role within your family. As things change, sometimes it can put people into a bit of a questioning about their identity, about, if this is changed, or if it's the case of a profession, either losing a job or not being able to perform in a particular way that you were before. But it's interesting to see how the people in your documentary really come through and how they go on to the next chapter of their lives.
Yeah, there's a lot of resiliency in all of these people, but you also see examples of quitting, dropping out, and not trying anymore, not wanting to know what comes next. And, in one of the characters, without giving too much away, that person that was in prison for a crime he didn't commit, he talks about that he physically decided, I'm not moving anymore. Yeah. I'm just going to lie right down here on the pavement and not going anywhere. And he found out that they drag you if you're not going anywhere. Wow. And whether he intended to be or not, I found that really poignant, powerful, kind of a metaphor for life in general. Yeah. If you want to quit, as I think we all do sometimes, guess what? It just keeps spinning anyway. So where is the value in that? And what kind of impact does it have if you do just quit? And, we see it play out in that man's life. And then we see it actually play out in another character's life who decides he's going to end his existence and the impact that had on his family. So really, I mean, there's just a myriad of ways that you can answer this what comes next question. And I kind of look at, if you answer it all these different ways, what's the result of doing it that way?
Yeah, definitely. And so your documentary, What Comes Next, that features 3 vignettes and 3 different sets of circumstances. The first story was Chad Kagi's story. And another story was the one that you were starting to refer to about the man who lost his freedom. And then you also featured a mother who had lost her son and the journey that goes with that. You talked about how you connected with Chad, but how did you find and select and connect with the other 2 stories?
You were talking about earlier, and I think it's an excellent point, is that we don't know people that we live alongside or work alongside a lot of times. And my experience as a reporter is that if I connect with people, I almost always find a story with everyone. And so in the course of kind of just being an inquisitive person and a person that thrives off a connection, it really wasn't hard to find these people. Mm-hmm. Linda Hill, whose son unfortunately took his life, is somebody that I met through work. Oh. And in the course of talking with her, I found out that her son was an organ donor. And that blew my mind to think there was somebody in that same city that was their best day, the day that was her worst day. Yeah. And they're more or less living in the same space. And I asked her if she would mind if I would reach out to that person who received her son's heart. And she actually was really happy to facilitate that, to help me with that. And then with the third act, the individuals who were in prison for crimes they didn't commit, my dad was a jail chaplain. Mm-hmm. And he taught me a lot about empathy. And so I connected with the Midwest Innocence Project and asked if there were a couple compelling examples of people who had spent years in prison who were eventually exonerated or were set free for crimes they didn't commit. And they told me, yeah, in fact, we have 2 guys that were on death row that were set free that are still living in the Kansas City area. And so that's how those relationships came about.
Wow. All of the stories are really extraordinary. And, I've seen the documentary. I don't want to give anything major away, but when you first hear the story as the person's explaining it, sometimes I know my reaction is like, oh gosh, like how could anyone ever get through that? That is such a trauma or such an injustice or just such a horrible loss to go through. But, and then it's incredible to see just how they get to the next place. And, it's not a straight line. There's, as you said, there's moments where people wanted to quit or just didn't know what to do or were in shock or were just sort of going through the next part of their life, but weren't really sure how they felt about it. And then, so it's a whole evolution. It's rarely what gets displayed in the short news stories or even in movies. It's messy, but it's fascinating to see how people really do get to the other side.
And I take that as a compliment, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I think.
Oh, absolutely.
I think too often we kind of wrap stories up neatly. We put people in one of 2 categories, and life is complex. I had to work through the thought process, for example, on the young man who took his life and somebody else is getting a new life. I was like, gosh, do you say that it all worked out for good?
Yeah.
That doesn't sound quite right. Do you say that, it's just horrible and nothing will ever be better? That's not quite right either. In the course of talking to some other people that have gone through organ donation, there was a woman who told me, triumph and tragedy live side by side. And I thought, oh, you put that so well. And once she said that, it gave me a different lens to look through a lot of things in life. And I started realizing that, isn't that just the way it is? I mean, you don't just get beauty. You get the tragedy and the beauty. And it's almost always mixed together. There's very, very rare that it's just a boulevard of green lights for years. It just doesn't work that way. And here's the funny thing. I haven't told anybody else this because it just recently happened. But, I mentioned my dad was chaplain of the jail. And this documentary comes out and it's really resonating with people and all. And I'm kind of facilitating these stories. And about 6 weeks ago, my dad passed away suddenly. Oh, and I'll be honest with you, it's been a tough time. But here's the thing is that it gave me a chance to look back over the course of his life and things that he'd written and things that he left behind. And I realized that this wonderful man that so many people are going to miss, his life was an arc as well. And he made mistakes and he did things wrong and he evolved and he wasn't always the person that I came to know. I think that was an important lesson for me that, hey, if let's say you've just turned 30 or you've just turned 50 or you've just turned 70 and you're thinking, I'm a finished product. Mm-hmm. I've done what I can do. I should have done more. There's still time.
Yeah.
And you still have an opportunity to evolve and do good things.
Absolutely. As you said, sometimes we tend to put people in a box or think of them as being known for a handful of things, whether that's talents or activities or roles they play in the family or in other parts of society. But really, we are complex. And if you are someone who's open to continually learning and trying new things or going through different parts of life, we really do change over time. And you can, as you said, it's never too late to try something new or change if that's what you want to do.
The executive director of the Midwest Innocence Project, who facilitated some of these interviews, her name is Tricia Bushnell. Mm-hmm. She works with a lot of people who've done bad things, in addition to a lot of people who've been wronged. And she said to me, you are more than the worst thing you've ever done. Wow. So if you failed, if you've just not really taken a lot of opportunities in life, you just haven't stepped out, or if you've done something that's just blatantly wrong that you're ashamed of, you're more than that one experience.
Yeah, definitely. I know we tend to forget that sometimes, but that's really important to keep in mind because it gives people hope that they can change, they can go on from here, and they don't always have to be defined by this one bad thing that happened if they truly want to change their lives. Wow.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So, you've got the people who are selected and you've filmed the interviews. How did you get to that point of putting it together and figuring out where to distribute it?
I think that since I was a little kid, that was my knack, was to see the weird thing or find the nugget in a story and then kind of see how it connects to other people and how we're all connected. And as a reporter, that was what came natural to me. So with this film, I kind of had a broad idea of what I wanted to do, but I was going to let the characters take me wherever they went. And then I started to see connections between the two characters in the first act. They come at it from different directions, but one finds his peace on a bicycle and the other finds his passion there. Mm-hmm. And so they intersected that bicycle at a different time in life. And then you've got the characters that they both were convicted of things that they didn't do. Mm-hmm. And they became friends on death row. So they're connected there. And then, of course, the second act, the two people are connected by a common heart.
Right.
And then when I stood back and I kind of looked at it, I said that to myself, this is about loss. It's the loss of a dream. It's the loss of loved ones. It's the loss of freedom. And those three categories kind of form the construct for the whole thing and how we move forward, how we cope with those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. I see. And then you put the story together, and I can totally see how those themes tie together very nicely in telling the story. How did you get to distribute it to Amazon Prime?
Yeah, so with Amazon Prime, really, if you jump through some bureaucratic hoops and meet their standards that they set in front of you, you can get it on there. And that kind of gives you a platform to see if it resonates with more people. So I went through that and then through a film festival locally, and then people asking me to share it here and there, and then on television. And it's funny, one of my philosophies is that if you have something that you want to do, don't ask someone whether you can do it or not. Mm-hmm. Just start doing it. And then maybe they jump on board at that point. If you've got a book that you want to write, I think it's Seth Godin who says, don't spend 4 years writing it and pitching it to somebody. Start the blog today. And that blog over the course of 3 years will become the book, and you'll already have a following. And waiting for permission or hoping somebody buys your idea has never worked for me. It's the stepping out first and then people follow later.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the small business owners that I've talked with or people who are pursuing their dreams sort of realize that at a certain point is, not to ask for, as you said, permission to do something or to wait until it's the right time, because it's probably never going to be the right time to do things. Yeah. But yeah, that's a great point, is to just start working on producing that content or getting those ideas out. And then over time it evolves and your crowd will find you and they will come with you and follow you along. So
yeah. And I'm hopeful that there will be people that want to get behind this episodic content, because there certainly are so many variations on this theme and things that we can learn from different individuals. And that's that's where my focus is now, is that I want to continue this. I guess we all wish, $10 million came our way and we could do this or that or the other. But in the course of pursuing something that's meaningful for you, that you feel like you're called to do, if you discover that it resonates with other people, you've already won. And I know that's been the case. I mean, people have told me they feel like they're not alone as a result of this. They relate to the different characters. And it's always funny to me that people that I know and strangers, it's a different character for each one. It's like, I really get that guy or that gal. I understand what they're going through. I feel like I've been there. It's different for each person.
Definitely. And, you don't even have to have had that exact experience, but the way that you portray and tell the stories or give them the platform to share their stories, as the viewer, I know I definitely empathized with them. I totally was feeling the pain that they were going through. Yeah, I could totally see how other viewers would say, I really resonated with this particular person telling their story. And, even if you haven't been in that exact situation, because if the common theme is loss, loss is a part of life, unfortunately. So I think on some level, we've all had a massive loss at some point in our life that kind of stays with us. So I think we can tie that and we bring that as we view these types of stories.
Yep, absolutely. And, you might have a good laugh over some of them as well. I mean, the person that I used to work with really related to the career change, that you can't do what you used to do. And we got talking about that. If you hold up as an example that I always wanted to be a great painter, I'm going to paint something that's the equivalent of the Mona Lisa, and you have the guts to put yourself out there and throw yourself into that and paint that painting. Well, what happens if you step back 3 steps and it's a stick figure? I mean, you went for it. Yeah, you had the courage, and then you just really weren't that good. Yeah. And that's a different kind of what next. And we laughed about it. And I told him that from my perspective, that's not such a scary thing. The stick figure doesn't worry me. It's the not drawing the stick figure in the first place. That's where you miss out. I've put out a lot of stick figures, and I usually get just meaning from the process,
Yeah. And, sometimes the stick figure or the sharing of the stick figure leads to the next thing, that maybe that's not the end goal. That's not where you were supposed to land and be the great painter. But maybe through the process, you learn that you really enjoy social media advertising, talking about your painting, or you really excel at different types of paint or different mediums of art or something. So, it's all about, you don't know if you don't try things out.
Yeah. And maybe it's comedy about stick figures and your ability to laugh at yourself frees up other people who are living in shame over the same kind of thing. You just never know how it's going to work out.
Right. Absolutely. So what are the key messages that you would want viewers to take away from this documentary?
I think just that you are not alone. And that seems to be the default. I know for a long time that was my default setting, was that, with reporting, I had panic attacks for a long period of time, many years into being a reporter, just being in front of people. I don't know where it came from or why. And that was embarrassing for me. It was something that I tried to hide. And then when I finally had just came to my limit and talked to my boss about it, found out that there's a bunch of people in my profession who are dealing with the same thing. And I really think that is a limiting factor in many of our lives, is that we fear transparency, we hide, the problem gets worse, or we find somebody who was willing to be open and authentic about what they are going through, and that frees somebody else, which frees another person. And then these people have connections with each other. They have deeper relationships. Everything goes in a different direction at that point. And that's where the really good stuff is. So if there's an overriding message, is grab one of these characters. You are not alone. You're not alone if you've done something terrible you're ashamed of. You're not alone if you feel lost. You're not alone if you feel embarrassed. You're not alone if you feel like you're not talented or your time has passed. Take any situation, and that pressed shirt guy that works alongside you that looks like he has it all together, I can virtually guarantee he does not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whether he's willing to tell you or not, everybody's dealing with something. And the people that are willing to connect on that level, they're living better lives, in my estimation.
Yeah, absolutely. So your documentary came out, I think it's been out for a couple months now. Is that right?
Yeah. It's been out 2 months.
Fantastic. So what are your goals for this documentary going forward?
Well, as a result of this, people have kind of shared with me what comes next.
Yeah.
And I learn different things from each person that does that. Mm-hmm. And I want to do more of those stories. I heard recently from a family of a well-known athlete mm-hmm. who took his life and took someone else's life. Yeah. This has been years ago. Mm-hmm. And, I think the general consensus was that, gosh, we thought he was a great guy, but he must have been evil. Oh. And, well, okay, there are more options than just what you came up with there. And there were a lot of other things at work. So I just find so many different what comes next scenarios that I'm determined to, in some way, turn it into episodic content mm-hmm. and continue to tell more of these stories.
Yeah, that's great. I think people can learn a lot from really seeing these stories and their complexity. And as you said, there's a lot of times there's even more than two sides to the story a lot of times. So being able to see that's important. Wow. Yeah. So What Comes Next is now available. How can people find it and watch it?
If you go to Amazon Prime, if you have a Prime account, it doesn't cost you anything additional. You don't have to rent it. Go to Amazon Prime and search What Comes Next. You'll see Chad Kagi, the ex-gamer, flying through the air on his bicycle, mm-hmm. prominently there. Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter at @KPatrickAllen. And I'm often posting some of these thoughts that I've shared with you.
Wonderful. So I'll put a link to What Comes Next on Amazon Prime and a link to your Twitter account in the show notes so that people can find it there too.
Terrific.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your story of creating the documentary, What Comes Next. As we close out the podcast, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything else that they can help or support you with?
If they want to join in the effort to continue this episodic content, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear your ideas or your own versions of what comes next. And, the other thing I would say is that you and your podcasts are an example of what I'm talking about, where if people, rather than hiding, can connect and band together. Even if we don't reach our ultimate goal, maybe you don't get the Academy Award or you don't become the millionaire or whatever. At least you make some good friends along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love what you're doing, and I'm glad that we connected. And we definitely have a common mission with the podcast and the documentary work, storytelling work that we're both doing. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thanks for listening to Beyond 6 Seconds. Please help us spread the word about this podcast. Share it with a friend, give us a shout out on your social media, or write a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. You can find all of our episodes on our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.